let us get started, shall we? All right, so you are here officially at starting early. I'm sorry, I have to stand over here. To support your child's independence through executive functioning skills at home and at school. And I appreciate that you all are curious enough to want to learn more about this. I could talk about this all day, but I promise I will keep it to an hour. You might wonder why I'm here as the Director of College Success at Perkins. And it's because I've seen a whole lot of kids try to go to college without these skills. And as an executive functioning coach, it's very clear to me that they're missing. And for our students with visual impairments, we have to make sure that we're explicitly, intentionally, and repeatedly instructing them on these skills often and as early as possible to build that muscle memory, to improve problem-solving capacity, which is a key skill for both college and job and career readiness. So that's why I'm here today, because I've seen the end result of not learning those skills, and I'm an executive functioning coach. So today we're going to explore what executive functioning is. It's a wide range of things, and you may be surprised at the way that it infiltrates your life every day. It's the skills that got you here today roughly on time. You're going to learn about the threads of learning through developmental stages that may be impacted by undeveloped executive functioning skills. And you're also going to explore a few ideas about how to begin to work on them at home, how to kind of translate that, because we know that our students, they're human beings, right? And your children are learning at home as much as they're learning at school. And they're just that one little human being, right? And we need to work to help build up consistent skills in both environments so that they are more empowered over the long term. Does that make sense? And as a previous speaker, I just saw Karen speaking about the developmental stages for our students and how they're impacted by vision loss. We know that the more that we can create a consistent message between home and school, the stronger that cognitive, that brain muscle, just like your arm muscle is going to get stronger if you work it out, the stronger your child's executive functioning and thus problem solving and more adult-like behaviors are going to be manifest as they get older. So, make sense? Okay. I can imagine you're tired, and I can imagine you want this done, but if you have questions, I love audience interaction, so do not be shy. If there's something you want to clarify or a what about, I love that stuff. I am good stopping and starting, so just raise your hand and I'd love to respond to you. All right? So why is this important? Why is learning executive functioning important for our students? And I'm going to stick with my slide over here. So it's a skill that we're not necessarily born with that instinctive, I know how to do this in our brain. We do need to learn it through, for typically sighted kids, incidental learning, and for our students with a visual impairment, through explicit and intentional instruction, okay? So it's crucial that we teach this to our students. And when it's not taught over time, the cumulative effects on critical thinking, problem solving, reading, writing can get quite substantial. Making decisions as an adult that might involve complex multiple steps, things like that, can get quite impacted by undeveloped executive functioning skills. We also know that executive functioning skills like decision making, impulse control, they mostly reside in the prefrontal cortex, the front part of our brain, and research has shown that that is the last part of our brain to have developed over the millennia, and in young adults it's the last part of the brain to develop around about age 25, 26, which is, for those of us raising teenagers and young adults, that might explain a few things. Some less than optimal decision making maybe that might be going on. Deferred gratification, I've raised 4 of them, and I have lived to tell the tale, but my hair is quite gray. So students with strong executive functioning skills can, some instinctively, do take to those ideas well. They're individuals whose brains are naturally going to think more systematically, more intentionally. They might recognize patterns just because that's how their brain is. And there are other students, not so much. And I want to unpack that a little bit for us and let us know that it's going to vary from human to human regardless of their vision, right? And regardless of the source of their visual impairment, whether it's cortical visual impairment or ocularly based impairment, okay? Some of us are good at this stuff and instinctive, some of us not so much. The vision loss just exacerbates or makes some of those challenges or strengths stronger or weaker depending on the individual, their environment they're living in, the challenges and instruction that they've been provided, and so on. Make sense? Okay. So I think we've covered this slide. So I'm building a case, right? And I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads, which makes me happy. The message in this presentation, as with several presentations you've seen today, is that there's a very clear need to start early in developing these skills. Just as we are looking for our child's first word, for their first steps, all of those things, right? When they write their first, all the things, all the milestones we look for in our children, executive functioning skills have little milestones too. And the earlier we start, the stronger that foundation is, right? The stronger those abilities are in our children, so that as we build more complex skills and ask them to do a multi-step task that has decisions nested in each step, or writing a paper that's an argumentative paper, they've got the foundational skills to attack that new challenge. They can generalize a skill to a new challenge, right? Teaching as a person, I told you the wrong room, I'm so sorry. Just as a person who has had to teach executive functioning skills to adolescents for a good 20 years now, it is a significant challenge to start from, a weak foundation, because you have to kind of backfill. Okay, so starting early, especially for your littles, is crucial. All right, little background about, again, why is it me in College Success talking about this? So this is a very busy slide, and I apologize. But the little background. So I direct a program, an initiative at Perkins called College Success at Perkins. It was started about 6 or 7 years ago. And it was designed to address a significant gap in college preparedness for our students with visual impairments who aspire to attend college. Nationally, about 42.8% of individuals who attempt college within about 8 to 10 years of high school graduation, only 42.8%, 43% actually graduate from college. That is lower than the national average of college completion writ large. Any statistics about individuals with visual impairment are suspect, because a lot don't self-report, a lot are not part of reporting mechanisms. It very significantly underreports the experience of those with CVI and so on. So the numbers are woodgy. It's a very technical term. The other key thing to know in this, and part of why we started College Success, was because in addition to that very low graduation rate, we had about 80% of individuals in a national longitudinal study that is sort of the standard in the field of disabilities. About 80% of individuals with a visual impairment reported enrolling in college within 8 years of high school graduation. Now, we know high school graduation is between 18 and 22 years old for most of our students with visual impairments. So that means by about age 30-ish, 80% of those identifying as visually impaired and part of some system attempted college. Now, I've been an educator for over 35 years in basically working with kids grades 6 through 22 years old as a college counselor, academic advisor, learning specialist, teacher, and a whole lot of other things. I've read several thousand transcripts in my day, interviewed about 5,000 students. I've seen a lot, right? And what I will say is 80% of our students saying they want actually enrolling in college also tells me that they're getting very poor advising and very weak support in deciding what the next best step after high school is and aligning that with their current demonstrated skills. And that was a big red flag for me as director of the program. We ran for 2 years a residential program right up the hill over there in Tompkins for 18 to 22-year-olds, sort of a gap year to work on ECC skills, orientation and mobility, independent living skills, enroll in a college class or two, and see how it went. And what was very clear from that experience, we worked with 13 kids over 2 years, was that their executive functioning skills were down in the basement. That a majority had no tools to manage their day, to manage their hours, to manage their obligation, to break down a large project into smaller chunks. They didn't know how to make to-do lists, to use Google Calendar. 80% of the students didn't know how to type. And these are students with a broad range of experience with a visual impairment. Some were congenitally blind. Some had acquired vision loss due to either disease or injury. And so we had low vision, no light perception. We had the whole gamut, right? And we had many with co-occurring conditions as well. But what was very clear is they were admitted to college because they had 3.7 GPAs, and but they had no idea how to manage basic obligations. It had nothing to do with O&M or ILS or anything else. And so my spidey senses were activated, right? And we really realized something needed to happen. We have since pivoted to a younger cohort. It was very clear, again, as the message said, we need to start earlier in raising knowledge for students, educators, and families. So thank you for being here and being part of that trio, right? And we created a program called Compass, which is in the lower left-hand column, which is for high school students, and a program for post-high school students because it's frankly a different funding situation and legal obligation that goes on in there. So Compass is direct service, one-on-one, 100% virtual, 9 months. We work with a student, family, and educator to explore what college means, what skills a student currently has, and what they need to do to build some of the gaps in skills. Executive functioning is one of them. And we have an executive functioning coach on staff to work on some of those skills. And we also have Navigator for students who's graduated from high school who are out of that entitlement program of IDEA, and they're on to ADA. And the obligations and responsibilities that places in that young adult, unless a parent has acquired guardianship in that setting. So a parent or a family member or someone else. Okay, are you with me so far? So we've seen a few things in a fairly systematic way. And so some of the concerns that I've highlighted already, a lack of executive functioning skills or even knowledge that it's in, the locus of control has to be in the individual, not another adult out there managing their time. There, in many cases, is no cognitive reason why a student isn't able to do that. They simply hadn't been exposed to the need for the skill and the practice of the skill so that they owned it, okay? There were significant gaps in a TVI's understanding of the crucial nature of these skills and an ability to integrate that into a student's day-to-day and recommended IEP goals, for example, okay? It was also very clear that for parents, you're juggling a lot. And I've sat in on sessions today so I could really see what you were learning as parents of younger children so that I could really make sure I was speaking to what you've heard today. And I know you're juggling a lot. There's a lot of unknowns for you with your child, and I want to be sure that we're supporting you as early as possible to create options over the long term and raise your information level. We've created a number of resources. I'll go over them through this presentation to help you ask those questions about executive functioning in more formal settings like an IEP situation, but to also integrate them into your day-to-day at home. It's not rocket science, I promise. You guys can do it, okay? All right, questions about this slide and how we got here and why I'm here talking to you about your younger children? I believe we can change the statistics by this type of work earlier. Yes?
You said that was something that was available online for, how do you sign up for something like that? How do you sign up?
Email collegesuccess@perkins.org.
Okay.
Yep. And yes, that's it. And so, yeah, you will not see Navigator online. It is in a pilot stage, literally since January. But it will be available for a new cohort in the fall. Okay, and Compass as well. It's a September through May program. We've run 43 students through this, and we're thrilled with the impact of virtual coaching. It's amazing. So, all right. Thank you for that question. All right, so as parents, I've raised 4 children, right, with radically different paths themselves, and we don't know what's coming down the pike no matter what. But what I will say is we are all sharing hopes for our children. We're sharing dreams for our children. We have worries for our children, and they're impacted by the reason you're here today, possibly a child with a visual impairment, and how might that impact what the possibility is of those hopes and dreams and worries, right? What might be impacting it or getting in the way? And my answer to that is we want to build skills in your child through you and through your advocacy with their educational team and family members around them, to empower them to build their skills as much as possible, as early as possible, right? So we can then see where they might struggle in different spheres. If there was an additional learning disability, an auditory processing disability, another thing that might be impacting how they learn that cannot be blamed on their visual impairment. And one of the things we consistently see is, well, it's because they're visually impaired. Please, we must be more curious about what's driving a challenge a child is having. And in some cases, I would argue some of the challenges children are having is because this executive functioning hasn't been built up and they haven't had the opportunity to try to manage aspects of their life, make mistakes, because that's how you learn, adjust, and then move forward. So I say that, in la la land, right? Because reality is life is challenging as a parent. If you're working, if you have additional children or older family members who may be dependent on you, a job that may or may not be flexible enough for you to flex with the needs of your child, a school environment that may or may not be adequately resourced, transportation challenges. Let's just talk about, the orange line lately or the green line lately in Boston. So I want to acknowledge that parents have their own set of challenges outside of managing or worrying about the future of their child. And yet at the same time, and that can impact, I know, because I've done many things for my children that my educator brain would be like, Les, you should not do that right now. They really should do that, but I don't have the time, right? We're often in that push-pull of, I know, I should have my child do this or pick up their room or fold their laundry or whatever the thing is. But for ease, for stress reduction, for whatever your need is, you may be making decisions that I totally get, and there is no judgment in this room, but that may be impacting your child's ability to develop those skills. And so perhaps we can brainstorm together, perhaps this can inspire some fresh approaches that over time is going to create more independence in your child and less work for you, is my hope. And certainly opportunities to get to know your child more. So that's basically what this slide is. So to reinforce a point I've made earlier, I want to make sure that we understand that expectations for our children can vary depending on the environment they're in, the pressures that an individual educator may have. I'm sure you've heard talk of the shortage of teachers of the visually impaired, of the challenges of their day-to-day job, often itinerant between multiple school buildings, which can make their ability to impact the behavior of other teachers quite limited, right? And that's where this, again, executive functioning conversation can empower you as you advocate for your child and your expectations for the opportunities they have to try things, to begin to learn how to manage themselves, to begin to set up a plan to reduce paraprofessional engagement in managing day-to-day life, backpack management, locker management, getting to class on time management, and so on. Acknowledging there are often school building issues, crowded hallway issues that may impact the ability to completely forego a paraprofessional, but it can inform the role that you expect that paraprofessional to play, right? So, key skills. Let's dive into that. You guys ready? Do a quick browse through key executive functioning skills. So some of the big ideas in executive functioning have they're very related to the ECC, self-determination, right? Problem solving, planning, self-awareness, initiative, motivation, the language some people use. These are all executive functioning skills. And they're not all equally the same and equally as strong in every single person. Some of us are wicked good at organization, not so good at task initiation, right? We might need really high interest things to do to get us motivated enough to initiate a super boring task, right? Speaking for myself, picking up my room is super low interest. So NCIS is my friend, and it's performed miracles in my life. So, and there's like 200 seasons of it. So I figure I've got another 15 years left of having to clean my room with NCIS. At any rate, you understand my point that we all are at different points in the skill development. And this is to you all as parents too, right? It allows us to be a little more human and not feel like we have to be perfect across the board. We're just not. We're humans. So executive functioning in a little more technical framework is the skills for anticipating, planning ahead, breaking down things into smaller parts, emotional regulation, task initiation, working memory, and more. They're essential, as you can probably conclude, for problem-solving skill development, tolerance of discomfort, independence at whatever level is appropriate for your child at the highest level possible for your child. They're all different. It's also crucial, and you may not realize this, for writing effectively, for writing well-organized papers, for recognizing the organizational structure of the reading that you're doing, and for our children reading via Braille or auditory reading, which is what a lot of kids going on to more rigorous or competitive college and employment tend to lean towards, not the Braille tactile reading. That executive functioning is that key piece that begins to recognize patterns and ideas, patterns and organization, right? And when we struggle to know that there's patterns and organization, then it's really hard to figure out what we're going to talk about that we just read, right? Because it's all just word soup, okay? So I want to just unpack those different layers that executive functioning can play in that's impacted by that loss of incidental learning, So if you walk into a lot of elementary school classes and middle school classes, the walls, parents of CVI kids know this, right, are cluttered. There is a lot of visual clutter in these rooms. And they're often how to organize a cause and effect essay, how to organize a pro-con essay, right? And our kids are missing that. They're not getting that visual reinforcement of executive functioning skills, right? They may not see how when the teacher says, hey, there's an assignment ABC that we're going to work on over the next 2 weeks, all of their friends write it down in their planner, right? So there are visual cues. Another example, and this is a true story, of a sophomore in high school, congenitally blind, and very college aspiring, totally awesome transition goal for him. Really disorganized, super unaware of how the passage of time, how long stuff took, was always late getting ready for the whole family to go anywhere. And his mother was out of her mind, so frustrated that he just wasn't figuring it out. He was the only visually impaired individual in his family. And I knew the family had a lot of complex pieces to their puzzle. And I asked the mom, so I know how I organize my life. It's a whole lot of different to-do lists and a calendar, and it's open all the time. And my children saw me utilizing those tools, and guess what? Now that my daughter doesn't hate my guts, she's doing exactly the same thing because she's now a young adult and sees I might have figured out a thing or two. And anyhow, so I pointed out to the mom that, you know, your son's not observing your strategy session on the kitchen counter, my friend. And she went, oh my stars, I hadn't even thought of that. Like, do you narrate what you're doing? Do you verbalize some of your planning steps? And it just had, and she's very competent, wonderful, loving mother. It's just connecting those dots of our lives for our students, and that's we can do that earlier, right? With awareness and knowledge, and that's why we're here today. So does that help you understand how this is very doable with some tricks? And so, all right. So, components of executive functioning. I've got 32 minutes. We can do this. So on the board, we have a lovely graphic. There are a lot of folks who talk about executive functioning out there. I'm sorry, I'm moving out of this. And there's nothing wrong with any one way that they're done. I love to work with the Smart But Scattered books by Peg Dawson and Richard Ware. This presentation has all the resources I'm going to refer to in the last 2 slides, and we're going to go over those, okay? So they all have their different naming methodologies, but so it doesn't really matter. It's the ideas that we're playing with, okay? Planning, organization, task initiation, flexibility, the ability to flex when mom says, the brakes went out on the car, I have to drive dad's car, we're gonna have to arrive to chorus practice 45 minutes late. Some kids have the flexibility because their working memory is strong, their emotional regulation is strong to go, oh, okay, mom, I'm sorry to hear that. That's a bummer. That must be expensive, right? And other kids who go into orbit, right? Because their working memory isn't very strong and they can't remember that mom's been worried about this for a while. They're just concerned with the here and now of what are they going to think when I walk in late, right? So these are executive functioning elements that often are interpreted as other things, but when you get down to the core, they're executive functioning, okay? Attention, self-control, metacognition. Metacognition is your awareness of your own mental thoughts. So I'm aware of my trying to keep on pace in this presentation, stay within the camera shot, and make sure that I'm not overwhelming you with information and lifting you up and becoming empowered, okay? So that's metacognition. It's hard to be metacognitive when you don't know why it's so stinking hard, right? Your cortisol levels are up, your stress is up, your prefrontal cortex then is non-functional, not just because you're 15 years old, but because you're stressed, and that suppresses the functioning of your prefrontal cortex, okay? That applies to us as adults too. Time management, also there's a thing called time blindness, a lack of awareness of the passage of time or the ability to accurately estimate how long it's going to take to do something, which is an interesting question for some of our students depending on how efficient they are in their use of assistive technology. And if any of you saw Huynh Chan and Sam's presentation on Tech for Tots, that's another start early and often with a wide range of tools, because that will improve efficiency, reduce frustration, improve cognitive development. You can see where I'm going with this, right? It leads to stronger outcomes and greater independence. Perseverance is another one, also known as grit, pain tolerance, stick-to-itiveness, and so on. That requires working memory. Why am I doing this? It requires metacognition. Oh yeah, I know I'm not really good at this, and that's why it's so stinky to do this, right? And so on. So when we work with an openness about, wow, there's a lot of different skills I've got to manage, you can see how we can begin to introduce this to our children at any age. And I can imagine some of you have younger children, some of you may be educators, you may have older children. This is applicable across the board. I just worked with a 28-year-old PhD student who needed significant executive functioning coaching, right? In my private practice. And so, questions on this? No? Okay. So, this is a nice way of breaking down this. And again, and I'm a big fan of giving you guys different ways of looking at this so you can think creatively about how you can empower your children, your other family members, yourself. So there's sort of two dimensions of executive functioning as described by Peg Dawson and Richard Guare. I'm sure others describe it this way too, but they had a nice, neat little chart, and so I used their chart. Your thinking executive functioning is that metacognition, planning and prioritization. Wow, I've got a really busy week. I know I've got track practice on Tuesday and Thursday. That paper's due on Monday. Grandma's birthday party is all day Saturday, right? I have to start my paper now on Monday so that I can get a draft done by Wednesday so Mom can look it over, et cetera, et cetera. Organization, that's a piece of what I just described. Time management. That kid clearly had a calendar and some big picture of what was going on in his life. Metacognition. And then doing is things like response inhibition. Verbal responses to things that may not be a preferable situation. Physical responses to a less than ideal situation. Emotional control is tied right into that. Sustained attention, task initiation. Often with task initiation, it has to do sometimes with not knowing where to start. Again, a visually mediated piece of information that sometimes all it takes is well, for this first assignment, let's sit down together and talk about where you think you should start and the different options. And maybe you could choose one and see how that goes, right? How powerful is that? I had a student in geometry once, a typically sighted student, but who had significant executive functioning challenges and was failing geometry. It was not going well at all. And the teacher realized, he was a brilliant teacher, he just said, all I need to do is just point her the place to start on the proof, and then she'll be fine. And we're like, if you're good with that, we're good with that, okay. That kid, it opened up the entire class for her. She passed the class. She is completing her PhD right now, okay? So it sometimes just takes that little twist to unlock that potential in our children. And then flexibility, goal-directed persistence. See how this is all tying together? Okay, awesome. So, a couple, I do really well with examples, so this is an example of executive functioning skills by age group. And this is from Beyond Booksmart, which is a fantastic online, if you guys do Facebook, I love their posts. I screenshot them all the time and save them and think about them all the time. I'm that kind of executive functioning geek. And I was a Beyond Booksmart coach for a while, so they know what they're talking about. So I find it a good way to kind of keep myself sharp about how to think about this in fresh ways. It might be a helpful resource for you all. But this is a great thing. Age 4 through 11, learning to pay attention, right? Often a visually mediated skill, how to manage attention in different environments. Following simple directions and rules that may be verbally spoken, but there may be visual instructions accompanying it that may be missing for our students. Or if our students happen to have ADHD, which can be a significant factor in executive functioning, and executive functioning being very weak in individuals with ADHD, they're all related, okay? It may be difficult to understand how to follow the directions if half of them are non-visual or inaccessible because they're visually presented, or they're on the big whiteboard, and even though a student may have a Jupiter, it's a lot to manage the visual input. They may be fatigued, they may be getting a headache, the lighting may be bad, and they're just not getting it all, and they're so busy focused on that, they're not hearing the auditory instruction, right? Whereas their peers may not be having to juggle quite as many really rigorous cognitive tasks. Middle school, at this age, students should be beginning to independently, either by memory, because they've got strong memories, or ideally by writing it down, but we know middle schoolers are not big into that, should be able to think and plan ahead a bit, right? And they're given more complex assignments, right, to begin to practice those skills. They could plan out work, multi-step work over time, right? And again, our students may benefit from tools to remember what their plan was, because they got a lot going on that they're learning. They're learning 2 curriculums, ECC and the mainstream curriculum. And so I'm a big fan of utilizing additional tools on whatever their preferred device is that they're actually going to use. That would be key, not your favorite device, but the one that's going to work for that student for now. And it's probably going to change over time. It's not going to be perfect because they're children, right? And they may learn something new and decide something else is going to work better. You see where middle school is going. A lot of beginning to push back on parents sometimes around this age. And they should also be able to follow a household routine and contribute to it by this age in appropriate ways, understanding if there's a co-occurring medical condition or physical condition, aligning tasks and responsibilities with that condition, but assuming capacity to we call it the zone of proximal learning, just a little outside the comfort zone, just a little outside. So, maybe it's just gathering the trash, or not gathering the trash and taking it out. You see where I'm saying? Just a little bit higher than, maybe not scrubbing that big old caked on casserole dish, which none of us want to clean, but maybe rinsing off the dishes and getting them in the dishwasher, right? That should be very, very able to do by middle school. Whether or not they do it, that's a whole different battle. I'm not getting into that. And by high school, learning to think flexibly, solve problems independently, identifying a range of resources, because you can see the path we're on for college aspiring and competitive employment for students in 4-year high school programs, 5-year high school programs, 6-year high school programs. This stuff takes time to build. Are you seeing that this doesn't just happen overnight, right? Start early. And then moving into that perspective taking, oh, I could understand why that might be really upsetting to her. My pushing my fingers in my eyes, or my whatever it is that I do that is fine with me and my family doesn't seem to mind, but I can see how, right? And when a student begins to struggle to do these things and begin to do them with some level of independence, then it may be time to ask a question, well, what could be impacting that? Do they need more explicit instruction so they can generalize it to new situations? Or are they beginning to struggle with that more abstract thinking, right? And be hitting perhaps where their brain isn't as good as thinking in that more abstract way. They may be more of a black and white thinker, and that may be their zone. That's good to know. Advanced philosophy is probably not going to be a good class for them, right? Because that's abstract thinking, okay? But if we can use these expectations to set the bar high, set those expectations high, and give age-appropriate challenges, then when that child is challenged to meet them, asking that curious question, beyond the visual impairment, what could be other things that are impacting my child's ability to do this task? Is it auditory processing? Is it an additional sensory impairment? Is it maybe CVI in addition to an ocular-based visual impairment? Is it a significant executive dysfunction and there's actually a diagnosable learning difference going on? Is it, you see where I'm going with this? We often see in the cohort, in the students we've worked with, we see everything blamed on their visual impairment and no curiosity about, well, what could be another explanation for this challenge? And then a student lands in college because they got 3.7 GPA and everybody wonders why it didn't go well. Well, it's because we were not curious enough earlier and we didn't have the mechanisms to go, wow, this isn't really going well, is it? Their peers, acknowledging that typically sighted peers and kids with visual impairment tend to develop at slightly different rates, and our visually impaired kids, because they're missing that incidental learning, are usually a little bit behind. That's fine. We can still ratchet up the expectation and ask that question when they're struggling to reach that. Okay? All right. Okay. Here's my brain dump list of some of the things our kids are missing. Missing watching you make your to-do list, those visual organization cues in a classroom, seeing how a friend is organizing a social event, missing the nonverbal cues of a social engagement. And that happens with a lot of individuals with neurodivergent brains as well, where they may not read that social cue the way perhaps the world assumes they are reading it. And so we need to be mindful for our students with a visual impairment and autism and neurodivergence. It may not be because of missing the visual cue, it may be because their brain interprets that data differently. And time management is a big one that is out there in the mist, but we need to concretely teach, verbalize. Hey honey, so we've got to go to the grocery store. I've got to drop off a package at grandma's, and let's see, how much time do you think that's going to take? Last time we were in traffic and it was like 45 minutes. Do you remember how long it took when there was no traffic? Oh, okay. How long do you think it's going to take to drop the package off at grandma's? Well, she talks, Mom. I don't know. 3 hours? You see where well, boy, that means we need to leave right now. Are you ready to go? Right? But that helps a student begin to create the scripts in their head, both for typical brains and neurodivergent brains. Okay. So a couple, here's a nice list of things that might impact the development of these skills. Few opportunities to practice these skills, right? Paraprofessionals are doing all the work, both behind the scenes and in front of the scenes. Well, John, I've got to get to your class. Well, we're going to have to leave early. Thinking through all those logistics instead of having a script. So today's going to be a busy day. How do you think it should play out? right? You could challenge a 5th grader to do that work with you. That would be a very appropriate challenge if you've laid the groundwork for it as a paraprofessional. Reduced academic expectations, and we hear students say this all the time. My teacher told me I didn't have to do this assignment. It would be too hard for me. Please, give me a break. Okay. Secondary diagnoses that we often see unaddressed in an IEP. And so a student has literally no ability to explain, well, yeah, I have ADHD. I don't know what it means. Wow. Okay, good to know. That makes it tough to advocate in a work or academic setting after high school when you don't know what that diagnosis means. Opportunities to fail and recover, we know that's how we learn. They need to fail that test so they can learn that not studying's probably not an effective strategy, or not taking notes in biology class is not an effective strategy. And this is as a learning specialist and 9th grade dean who had that conversations with several hundred kids over the years. So additionally, on a less light note, some individuals bring with them lived trauma that may or may not be resolved and addressed, that may have an active impact on their ability to learn, think in higher order ways, because they're still living and being in that trauma. And we have to bring that trauma-informed care to these children. Vision loss could be one of those traumatic events. There may be other traumatic events, related grief related to vision loss, especially adventitious or after early childhood vision loss, is a systemic grief in a family environment and community that, unless addressed, can impact that student's ability to take advantage of all the stuff they've got running around up in that good brain of theirs. And then that lack of holistic support. And I say this as a learning specialist who's sat next to a lot of these kids who don't know how to learn. And someone else has done the learning for them, done the note-taking for them, done the studying for them, created a study guide, right, with no intentional scaffolding of responsibility onto that child. No scaffolding of the need to digest the material on that child's own so they can show us what they're able to do. There's an awesome graph of vocabulary acquisition for students with dyslexia. And on the graph, students with dyslexia, there's a very low growth angle of the vocabulary acquisition to age 18 for students with dyslexia, because they're not reading at all. And the chart for students who are not diagnosed with dyslexia, the angle of the vocabulary acquisition it's not a straight angle. It goes exponentially up around about age 10, 12, because the quantity of reading and the complexity of reading accelerates, and they're acquiring both new vocabulary and the problem-solving skills to decode unfamiliar words based on prior learning. I've worked with a lot of postgraduate athletes, kids who've taken a 13th year of high school to get bigger and stronger and better and faster, right? To get into that better, whatever, similar profile. And that often is happening with our students who aren't accessing material consistently enough to begin to build the vocabulary, which then builds concepts and more complex ideas, and as far as that student is able to go, knowing they're not going to mature till they're like 25. So, give it the long goal, but don't let a lack of exposure to executive functioning skills impact that. 4:19, we got 11 minutes, we've got this. Okay, you've heard me mention reading a little bit in vocabulary development. The image I have on the screen right now is of a rope, totally tightly coiled on the right side, tightly wound. And this is an illustration of the very complex act of reading that all depend on executive functioning, right? There's decoding the letters, that language, word recognition down on the bottom, on the left side of the screen, phonological awareness, decoding and sight recognition, that's all word recognition, that comes with practice and fluency. Reading, in case you missed the memo, can be auditory. Libby at your local library has books your child can access on a phone or an iPad, right? Listen to those books together. Talk about what the words mean. What's the story? What was the feeling that evoked in your child, right? Language comprehension is another part of the thread. What's the background knowledge a child brings to this? Our kids' background knowledge sometimes is limited, right? Because of the visual, and sometimes they don't get out much because they don't have a broad range of friends in some cases for all the reasons we know. So these are things that we can build as we structure our family time if possible, or when we have limited time with our children because life is super busy, being intentional about how we narrate the world around us, the vocabulary we're intentionally introducing. Language structures such as syntax, more complex sentences as our children get older. If they don't have practice breaking down a complex sentence with several different parts to it to derive meaning and determine, is the first part saying the same thing as the second part, or is it contradicting, right? And reading for our non-visual readers doesn't give a lot of visual, obviously, cues that we get as visual readers. Paragraph indents, breaks in the chapter, dots, all sorts of visual cues that give us all sorts of different ways of managing some of that syntactic meaning just from the visual structure of the book. So I say that. Do you see why I'm saying this? Reading is essential to build those more complex pieces of our children's brain. Okay, so what can you do? A ton. So I'm going to briefly introduce, and you'll have links to all of this, so don't worry, some tools we have that can help you or students you're working with right now. The Expanded Core High School Readiness Checklist is created by Robin Clark and Utah School for the Blind. It's brilliant, and it was inspired by our college readiness checklist when we all realized none of us have goalposts we were aiming for. And so she created this in response to some work we did. And it's super awesome. It gives you goalposts by grade band. I don't think I kept all the, no, I didn't. But it's super useful. And if your child isn't progressing through that grade band and kind of hitting that end of the grade band within that kind of 3-year window, curiosity might kick in, okay? Our college readiness checklist we designed because there was no goalpost. Our kids kept saying to us in our program, oh, I got this. I'm good. Yeah, my tech is fine now. No, honey, you're typing 15 words a minute. You haven't practiced in 3 months. Data would say otherwise. And they're like, oh, I'll be fine. No. So we needed to come up with something a little more concrete for our friends. And it's turned into this wonderful tool. It's a conversation starter, and it's really designed to give anyone with any age, anytime a student says, I think I want to go to college, it gives you a tool to say, oh, what do you know about college? That's a great thing to learn about. I've got this cool checklist, and it's got a little rating system. It's put in the student's voice. I am good at X, Y, Z. I can do A, B, C, and so on. And the key is do it with independence, because guess what? When you go to college, unless you're living at home and there's a plan, you're doing it independently. So an example of executive functioning skills in the college readiness checklist, sorry, this is a little fuzzy. I can routinely and independently set and follow my daily routine of activities that moves me forward towards my academic and personal goals. I'm going to go out for DECA. I think they have a conference in November. I'm going to apply to attend the conference. And I know it's not accessible, so I'm going to ask my guidance counselor to get it to me in a Word format so I can fill it out. That's what I mean by independent, right? I will say there is gobs of data right now showing us that our children coming out of the pandemic are still miles behind where their peers were 5 years ago. And I probably most of my friends are educators in the field, in classrooms right now. And they're all recognizing that all students are struggling with a lot of these skills. So when I give you these bars, there's a broad range of wiggle, and you sprinkle COVID on top of that. But it's these bars still give us a sense of what we might consider to be appropriate aspirational for these kids, and that we need to work to get them back to. Another example, I devise methods for efficiently and effectively managing my written and electronic communications. In other words, I label the papers that I'm writing with titles when I save them on my computer or Braille note, so that I can remember where the heck to find them, or what, you see what I'm saying? We're gonna skip over that one. Here's a sample of the Executive Skills Questionnaire by Dawson and Guare. And we have a link in the resources to a downloadable version of this. I use this all the time. It is so wicked fun. So, for example, for planning and prioritization, when I plan out my day, I identify priorities and I stick with them, and students rate themselves. Strongly disagree all the way up to strongly agree, or 0 could be NA. When I have a project to do, I make a list to help structure the task. Right? We should all take this test. And actually, I've had parents take this test and go, oh, this explains a lot. I understand now, okay? For organization, I consider myself an organized person. That's also metacognition. My work area is neat and organized, not mine. I have methods for managing my written and electronic communication. I review it every morning and respond to anything that demands. I put in a to-do folder, the things, right? So task initiation, sustained attention. Once I start an assignment, I work diligently until it's completed. We know we have children who do that, and we know we have children not so much. So what to do tomorrow? Think out loud. You've heard me say this before, vocalize. Shopping list. You know, honey, we're having lasagna for dinner when Auntie Jane comes over. Can you start working on a shopping list for me, and let's go over it in 5 minutes, right? Planning meals, right? That requires either simple steps, we're having peanut butter and jelly, but which requires actually some excellent ILS skills. 2 more complex multi-step ones that might demand reading an ingredients list, reading a series of steps, working on time estimation, etc., right? If grandma's coming at 5 and we need the lasagna to be cool by dinner time, how do you think that would time out? And again, you can back that to a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, and begin to stretch those muscles. Storytelling is a great one. Some of the concepts behind EF is things like sequencing. Johnny, I need you to go bring this toilet paper to the bathroom and put it in the closet, and then grab the dirty towels from the pile and bring them to the laundry. So that's 4 things. So, and that's a classic test we do with all of our children, right, to see where they are developmentally, right? So in storytelling, there's things like that too. Or there's big ideas versus little ideas. Kids who are challenged with executive functioning, if you ask them, tell me about the last book you read. Could you just, tell me about the book? And they go, well, so there were these 2 little kids and their parents ditched them. And so they were walking on a path in the woods, and this big, huge, nasty wolf came, but they escaped to the house of the 3 bears. I'm merging fairy tales, but you see what I'm saying. So they're in the weeds with the details, right? Versus, well, it was a story about 2 kids and they got lost in the woods, but they managed to get out and lived happily ever after. That's a kid with pretty effective executive functioning. They were able to see the big arc of the story, and they didn't get lost in the weeds, okay? Great way for you as a parent to go, okay, we gotta work on that, okay? And then working memory. Do you remember what you even just heard, right? Which is, for some of us, not so good, because the squirrel just ran by, or my sister just yelled at me, or the cat just jumped in my lap, any of I'm hungry. So tasks at home that require sorting, sequencing, engage your child, putting away laundry. All the shirts go in one pile, and you know how that goes. Reading together is always a brilliant, brilliant thing, even if it's a book from Libby in the car on a long drive and talking through this. There's so many awesome podcasts with stories and goal setting. So honey, if you want to go to Disney World in a year, what are some of the things we need to do? How much do you think it's going to cost? How could we find that out? What are some questions you might ask, right? Because our kids don't know how to do that anyhow. We have to teach all of our kids this, but our students with visual impairment need more, and that's going to build that executive functioning that you can then transfer to assignments or looking for a job and so on. Cooking, singing songs for younger children is a super way of doing that, of getting rhythm, of fun, sweet stories, of playing, of engaging. Super fun ways to do that. So other finally things to do now, focus on literacy, fluency, and efficiency. And I'll say for you parents or people who are working with low vision students, reading 38-point font for a high school student is not reading fluently. And your students must be reading much more rapidly than that will allow. They need to be reading auditorily in addition to that visual use at about 200 plus words a minute. Plus. Strong college level readers are reading 300 plus words a minute. A strong Braille reader is reading about 150 words a minute. Super mega strong, maybe 200, and that's about the upper level, okay? So I really want us to think about that literacy component. It's key to so many other things. Technology, so that you can do all these things fluently and independently. Independence, reducing that learned helplessness. Benefits of starting, I think we've gone over that. Here's the resources. Our College Readiness Resource Center, we've filled with, I think we've got about 55 documents in there right now. Just about to post a problem with the gift grade article, so that one's going to be a good one. And 2 articles on executive functioning. High school readiness checklist is linked there. Our college readiness checklist is listed there. Tech competencies checklist. And the Harvard Graduate School of Education Center for the Developing Child has a great EF section that I highly recommend, just to give you ideas. It's not like you have to meet these things. It's just you got to remind yourself every once in a while what on earth we're aiming for, right? I go there all the time. And then if you're super geeky about this stuff like I am, there's a few webinars we've got here too. Summer learning series about Perkins Tech competencies in reading for students with visual impairment. It's my favorite series. The summer learning series 2022 is all about what is the state of college in 2023, 2022. I lied, it was a year ago. What are the different types of programs that are out there for different students, students with intellectual disabilities, students with autism? What are programs that can allow access to that shared experience that may be appropriate for some of our students that are separate from, I have to get an associate's or a bachelor's and that's the only option. There's so much more out there right now. Best practices through AER is another great one. There we go. I did it. 4 minutes over. I'm sorry. Thank you for your time. I will stay here as long as you need me to answer any questions you have. You're also welcome to email me. My email's at the bottom.
Thank you.
Thank you for staying.